Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Amid all the turmoil of the past few months, Theresa May somehow appears to have strengthened her grip on leadership. But this morning, there's a genuine threat to her authority. Once again, from backbench Tory Brexiteers. MPs belonging to the 60-strong European Research Group, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, have threatened to vote against her final Brexit deal if she tries to force through a customs partnership with the EU. Later today, after Prime Minister's questions, Mrs May will chair a crucial meeting of the Cabinet's Brexit subcommittee, which is likely to be split over the issue. Here's a report from our political editor, Faisal Islam.
It's customs crunch time in Cabinet. Will trucks go as freely? Will trade flow as seamlessly with Europe? Is it even possible, as the government plans, to prioritise new trade deals abroad?
This moment of decision about what kind of customs relationship we have with the European Union is a watershed moment. Either we're going to take back control, as the British people voted, or we're going to allow that to be eroded, and we'll carry on making contributions, not taking back control, and indeed not being in control of our own trading relationships with other countries.
The PM has ruled out a customs union. That leaves two options on the table: a customs partnership, but key Brexiters Boris Johnson and Liam Fox don't like that, and a customs agreement, which will inevitably introduce some new frictions into trade.
The Cabinet's customs battle may not be solved today. Some Brexiters feel that the customs partnership is in fact a Trojan horse to stay in a customs union, and the reverse true too, that Brexiters secretly want no deal. There's a lack of trust, but time is running out. A compromise needed really quickly.
And whatever the Cabinet comes up with, Parliament, both the Lords and the Commons, may well have other ideas and seek to stay in some sort of customs union.
And if we're going to get a sensible Brexit for business, for the people of this country, then we need the government to listen to what people like the CBI and others are saying. We need to ensure that business continues to function effectively, and that is why we need to remain in a customs union. And I hope, even at this late stage, the Prime Minister will hear that message.
And this matters beyond trade, particularly here in Northern Ireland. The EU negotiator Michel Barnier already trying to sell his border solution. The Lords also likely to defeat the government on this issue later today. Faisal Islam, Sky News.
Lewis Goodall. I mean, Lewis, first of all, just how crunch is this Cabinet Committee meeting?
Well, as Faisal was saying there, it may be that we don't get a decision today, but it can't be too much longer. Time really is ticking. We've only got 10 months until we leave the EU. And more broadly, the Prime Minister has really got to try and find a compromise position. The big question is, of course, is where the compromise comes from. Because on the one hand, she has two imponderable difficulties. On the one hand, she has these 60 or so members of the ARG and other Eurosceptic MPs saying, well, basically, your compromise position, this
quite extraordinary, really, if you think about it.
I mean, really extraordinary. But there's one element which is, I think the Prime Minister's going to have to decide who's going to blink. Is it going to be the 20 or so Remainer MPs, people like Anna Soubry, or is it going to be like people like Mr Bridgen, who we're going to speak to in a moment from the ERG? Because, of course, the Prime Minister can say, are you really going to derail Brexit, risk Brexit, over this customs agreement? Now, people like Mr Bridgen, I'm sure, would say, well, it would be Brexit in name only. But the point is, there is a parliamentary question here, which is, even if there was a replacement Prime Minister, say they get rid of Mrs May and replace her with a more Brexit-friendly Prime Minister, the parliamentary arithmetic would still be extremely tricky. It is not clear, with Labour voting in favour of some sort of customs arrangement, and if you assume around a dozen or more Conservative MPs would do the same, there is a parliamentary majority for it, and that's, I think, what Mrs May will go back to again and again.
Theresa May is facing another Brexit headache after Tory MPs on the 60-strong European Research Group threatened to vote against the final Brexit deal if she tries to force through a customs partnership with the EU.
Later today, the Prime Minister will chair a crucial meeting of the Cabinet's Brexit subcommittee, which is expected to be split over the issue.
Well, let's take a look at what a customs partnership would look like in practice. It would see the UK collect tariffs on behalf of the EU for goods coming into the UK that are destined for an EU member state.
Businesses would be able to claim back any tariff rebates if the goods stayed in the UK.
Although technically difficult, officials have suggested that a customs partnership could solve the Irish border question because there'd be no hard customs border between the UK and the EU.
However, it still leaves open the problem of what will happen if there are significant regulatory differences between the EU and the UK beyond tariff arrangements.
The customs agreements being proposed by Brexiteers would attempt to reduce customs controls and barriers between the EU and UK, making the border as frictionless as possible.
Goods would be electronically tracked and pre-cleared with tax authorities.
And firms could operate as trusted traders who can move goods freely without having to pay duty every time they cross the border.
However, it would not solve the Irish border question, as there would still need to be tariff checks.
Well, despite the potential revolt facing Theresa May at today's meeting, Cabinet Office Minister David Lidington backs the Prime Minister to find a solution.
I think that the Prime Minister carries on as our Prime Minister and our leader. And what I find when I talk to her is that I'm always amazed by her resilience and by her motivation, which is, she's not somebody I think who's ever normally accused of grandstanding for media or publicity purposes. She's someone who is motivated entirely by a sense of public service in what she does, getting the best deal for everybody in every part of the United Kingdom. And when I go out around the country, even amongst people of political opponents, there is often real respect for Theresa May's sense of duty, service and the job that she's doing in difficult circumstances.
In our political correspondent, Lewis Goodall, who's in Westminster for us. Lewis, this group of 60 or so MPs, they're really threatening to bring down the government now?
Well, Kamal, that is really the question. This is a game of chicken, in effect, and it all depends on whose bluff the Prime Minister chooses to call, because she has two opposing sides to all this. On the one hand, she's got 10 or 20 or so Conservative MPs who say that they want some sort of proper customs agreement with the European Union, or potentially a new customs union. And on the other side, she has these 60 or so Conservative Brexiteers who say that they want really to cut these ties pretty much and have the minimum type of customs arrangement possible. Who blinks first? Well, I suspect that the Prime Minister, in the end, will look at the Brexiteers into the whites of their eyes and say this: do you want Brexit? That's what you want above all else. Do you really want to risk put Brexit at risk by removing me as Prime Minister? And bear in mind this as well, she'll say, even if you replace me with Boris Johnson or Liam Fox or whoever, a more Brexity Prime Minister, they will face the same problem that I face, which is this: there is a majority in the House of Commons for some deep customs arrangement, with Labour saying that they want a customs union and 10 to 20 Conservative MPs voting the same way, and the SNP, etc. Even if you had the most Brexit Prime Minister possible, including, say, Jacob Rees-Mogg, they would still have that parliamentary arithmetic to deal with. So then what do? Do you want to have a general election over customs arrangements? Try and explain that to the public, she might say. That is a big issue. But also, bear in mind this as well. Whatever they agree, assuming they manage to come to some sort of agreement today, which is by no means certain at all, but even if the Conservative Party does agree on a technological solution or a customs arrangement or a customs partnership, whatever you want to call it, Cabinet officials and civil servants are pretty clear about this. Whatever they choose, it almost certainly won't be ready. Never mind when we leave in 2019, but probably won't even be ready by 2021, which is when the transition arrangements come to their end. This is a really complicated business. It would be one thing even to do it, even if you had the political will and political consensus. And my word, we don't have that.
Lewis, for now, many thanks. Now, Theresa May is facing another Brexit headache after Tory MPs on the 60-strong European research group threatened to vote against the final Brexit deal if she tries to force through a customs partnership with the EU. Well, let's speak to former Conservative leader and prominent Brexiteer Ian Duncan-Smith, who's in Westminster for us. And many thanks indeed for joining us today, Mr Duncan-Smith. Are you one of the 60 or so MPs who are warning the Prime Minister against a customs partnership?
Actually, the document I think that you're referring to today is a fairly substantial document in which it actually simply looks at what those future relationships can be, and it makes the very considered point that the proposed customs partnership is unbelievably complicated. It will lead to great confusion, and it'll mean that we really won't be able to do proper trade deals with other countries. So it's been laid out very, very clearly. The alternative one, which is this improved and speeded up process at the borders, is the one they should use because it's the simplest. And, you know, after 6 years running a government department, I can tell you, simple is always best.
It's so unacceptable to you because we're being told that it will resolve the Northern Ireland border question and will result in frictionless trade.
No, there's always, I think there's a golden rule that really runs when you are involved with civil servants and the government generally, which is always push them back to ask the simple question, what is it you're trying to solve? If you try and solve lots of different problems at the same time, it almost invariably leads to a mess. And we've seen endlessly government programs that simply crash and burn because they were too complicated, trying to solve too many problems. The single problem they have to solve is what is the best way to ensure that our future trading relationship, whatever that is finally negotiated to be, and hopefully it's a free trade one, will actually be able to cross the borders, goods and services, with the minimal amount of fuss.
How do we do that?
Well, that is by the other proposal they have, which is to ensure that lots and lots of this, a majority of it, is done. Any goods going across into Europe are declared in advance, they're checked, they're sealed, all that sort of stuff that goes on now in many places. In fact, the European Parliament said this is the right way to do it. Keeping it simple, there's no need for a hard border with Northern Ireland. And the key thing here is we want to be able to say that if we do a trade deal with the United States or who knows, whatever country, Japan or wherever, we want to be able to say that if we agree free trade, it's immediate free trade for both sides. The problem with this proposal is you would have to also align all the regulations that the European Union has, and they're going to add to those endlessly, which will encumber businesses dramatically. You're going to have to add to those, have them all comply with that, even though they may not be selling into Europe. They may only be selling into the UK.
But your suggestion there sounds like more bureaucracy and more red tape, which is something that we were told we wouldn't see in the run-up to the referendum, that there would be less red tape.
Yes, I agree. Well, that's exactly the point of why we want... why the proposals for this new customs partnership simply don't add up, because they add to complexity, because, you know, you'll have to have a rebate if you don't sell to the European Union.
The same as your plan, doesn't it?
Sorry?
Same as your plan, doesn't it?
No, that's not my plan. The new customs partnership...
There'd be more bureaucracy, more red tape.
The new customs partnership is not my plan. I think it therefore complicates. My view about this is we want to get on to a trade arrangement with them based on free trade, and the borders, that is the moment in which goods cross the borders and services, to be as frictionless as possible. And I think the other proposal they've got on the table is the right one for that, because it means you have to change things to a very minimum degree, and all of that is doable, and it's being done. You know, if you look at the Swiss border, they're out of the customs union. They trade with Europe actually to a far higher degree than we do.
But they have free movement.
They'll tell you straight away that the goods, the free,
but they have free movement.
Free movement isn't anything to do with the passage of goods. That's to do with people. This is to do with the selling of goods, etc. And the goods there are hardly stopped at all at any stage, and then only checked. And after all, you know, coming goods back and forth across the border checked for illegal migrants happens all the time anyway. So,
but they have free movement, and that's what people voted against, isn't it?
You know, no, I'm not asking for us to have the Swiss system. I'm simply isolating one element of it, which is that they are not in the customs union. They are outside the customs union. They strike trade deals with other countries. The point that I make is if you look at the border arrangements between them and the European Union, they are infinitely much, much simpler than this plan. And then if you go to Turkey, which is in the customs union, their border is solid. In other words, there's barriers everywhere, and you don't get the trade across in that free-flowing way. So this customs partnership does not solve the problem of making sure that we get a very frictionless border, and I think the other plan does.
The Prime Minister's Deputy, David Lidington, has said that she is trying to do the very best for everybody in all parts of the country. But when the correspondent says that the customs partnership would lead to the collapse of the government, I mean, you're holding her feet to the fire here.
Well, not really. I simply have this simple view, which is that we, as a parliament...
But it's a threat, isn't it?
Well, if you want to ask me a question, let me finish the answer, will you? We, as a government, were elected on the basis at the last election that we were leaving the customs union, leaving the single market, and we would deliver Brexit. And I think the public has a right to expect that we do just that. We deliver Brexit, which is what was voted for. Lots of people don't like it. The Lords at the moment are doing their level best to stop Brexit. But the reality is, if you give the public a choice, they made that choice. We need to get on with it. And
but 16 million people voted for Remain.
Yeah, look, you know, lots of people vote for a different party at a general election. You don't say, oh, that's quite close, therefore you don't form a government. If you have a majority, you form a government. If you go to the polls and the polls tell you by the public vote that you have won, this is the biggest vote ever. You know, those who voted to leave were the majority. We gave them that chance to say so. They've given us a direction. We now have to deliver it. I mean, you know, if you're going to start quibbling about whether or not you had a certain amount of votes, which means you have a right to stop it, you don't. The public voted to leave, and we just have to get on with it.
Are you honestly prepared to bring down the government on this?
No, there's no threats in this. This is an argument about what is best. This is not a threat. This is about saying, look, there is a debate about this. Here are the reasons why the new customs partnership doesn't work. And honestly, it's not helped if you try and reduce it to a simplistic process of saying this is some kind of threat. It's not. You know, after all, what is debate all about? It's about making sure your case is presented so you persuade people that the best way to do something is the way that you think it is. And that's exactly what is going on here. The new customs partnership is quite obviously a bad deal for the UK, and the other alternative is better.
Well, let's get more now on the battle facing Theresa May after Tory MPs on the 60-strong European research group threatened to vote against a final Brexit deal if she tries to force through a customs partnership with the EU. The Prime Minister will chair a crucial meeting of her Brexit war cabinets later this afternoon, which is expected to be split over the issue. So let's take a look at some of the major players in today's meeting and their views on a customs partnership. May's Brexit Secretary, David Davis, has previously described the customs partnership proposal as a blue sky thinking, and her Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, has said no form of customs union is expected after Brexit. He's even hinted he would resign if his ability to strike trade deals were curtailed. Meanwhile, Environment Secretary and long-time Brexiteer Michael Gove has declared the customs partnership completely bonkers. The Prime Minister does have support from the likes of Chancellor Philip Hammond, who has previously said any trade deal would need to facilitate the freest and most frictionless trade in goods between the UK and the European Union. He's expected to be backed up by Business Secretary Greg Clark, who is one of the parts of the government most affected by Brexit. He has previously said it is essential to avoid introducing frictions into well-developed supply chains. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Conservative MP Nigel Evans, who is in Westminster for us, and Labour MEP Richard Corbett, who is in Brussels for us. Many thanks indeed to you both, gentlemen. Nigel Evans, if I could firstly start with you. Are you a member of the European Research Group?
Yes, I am.
And you're warning the Prime Minister against a customs partnership. Why?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's not short of advice. That's one thing for certain. You've only got to read the newspapers today to see that she's having a lot of advice on the next stage. The next stage is going to be absolutely vital. We are in a very strong position. We've got a trade deficit with the European Union of about £70 billion every year, and it's growing. They will want to keep selling us cars, champagne, Prosecco, you name it. We will want to carry on buying that. And I believe that a trade deal could be done between us and the European Union without having to go into anything that is hugely bureaucratic, or indeed what a number of us fear, which is some form of BRINO, which stands for Brexit in name only. We knew the game the Labour Party were playing when they said, oh no, we're going to leave the customs union, but let's join a customs union. And it's a little bit like the Hotel California, which is you check out, but you never leave. And that's roughly where I think the Labour Party, and certainly those who voted Remain, many of them want to go. And that is to have one foot still in the door of the European Union. One thing is for absolutely certain, anything that we do post-Brexit, none of it needs to be justiciable by the European courts. And if that is the case, then clearly I think that would be a red line for a number of us.
Richard Corbett, according to Nigel Evans, if we continue the way that we're going to have Brexit in name only, which isn't what the British people voted for.
Well, the British people voted in favour of Brexit. The question of whether you also leave the European Customs Union, which is wider than just the EU, or other aspects of the EU, the various agencies, is still an open question. And clearly the government is divided on it. When one minister calls the Prime Minister's plan bonkers, it's clearly a pretty deep and bitter division. Actually, they're grappling with three problems. First, how on earth do you leave a customs union, the customs union, without creating friction to your trade to our main export market? Second, how do you leave the European Customs Union without walking out of the deals that the EU actually has with countries across the globe, which are to our advantage at the moment? And thirdly, how on earth do you make the border in Ireland, how do you turn it into a customs border without having customs controls?
The rest of Europe's waiting with bated breath to find out.
OK, let's pick up on those points of Nigel Evans. They are big questions, aren't they? How do you resolve the Northern Ireland issue, and how do you make sure that you do have frictionless trade? Because the Europeans say that that's not going to be possible.
Do you know, the only people who talk about Northern Ireland and Ireland as a problem are those who want us to stay in some form of European Union, single market customs union, call it what you will. If we were able to do a trade deal with the European Union, which we believe is doable, then, of course, the problem between Northern Ireland and Ireland disappears. So don't put the cart before the horse is the first thing.
No, it doesn't.
And as far as what the British people voted for, Theresa May said Brexit means Brexit, and I totally endorse that. She also said we shouldn't have one foot in the European Union door, and that means leaving the European Union in its entirety. And I think that's what Richard and his friends really find it incredibly difficult to work through. Don't forget, we don't have a trade deal with the United States of America, and we have a trade surplus with them of about £50 billion. Now, of course, President Trump wants to do a trade deal with us, and we're very keen to do one with him and a number of other countries as well that currently we can't do because we're in the European Union. Now, Richard has just mentioned all these countries that the European Union has trade deals with. What's going to happen to those? Well, I sit on the International Trade Select Committee, and we are looking at very much at this particular issue. And Liam Fox has made it clear that he wants to grandfather the trade deal that exists with the European Union to the United Kingdom. So it would be exactly the same as what exists now with the EU to the UK. I don't see a problem with that. And a number of countries have already indicated that they are prepared to grandfather those rights to the United Kingdom.
OK, Nigel, just before I put those points to Richard, the Prime Minister did say Brexit means Brexit. She did say in the run-up to the general election that the United Kingdom would be out of the single market, would be out of the customs union.
Yes.
The British public said no. She lost the majority in Parliament.
Well, no, because if you look at it, the people who voted for parties that were actually accepting the decision of the public at that referendum, the 80% of them voted for parties that actually supported that. And in fact, we've triggered Article 50, and that has been endorsed by the British Parliament by a large majority. My advice to Theresa, though, is that when she sits around the War Cabinet this afternoon, she can listen to people like Philip Hammond and David Lidington, who very much campaigned for the Remain side, or she can listen very carefully to people like Boris Johnson, Liam Fox, David Davis, who campaigned for leave. It is their advice I would veer towards, because they're the ones that found themselves more in touch with the British people during that referendum than are some of the others who are sitting around that War Cabinet.
Richard Corbett, it does sound like somewhat of a threat from Mr Evans there.
Well, it's remarkable because the government's own figures conclude that if we leave the customs union, we take a major hit to the British economy, destroying jobs, losing exports, not just to Europe, but to the rest of the world. It's not so easy to grandfather the agreements we have with the rest of the world because, for instance, they give us, in many cases, access to their markets as long as our products are ours, with local content. Most British cars, for instance, don't have more than 50% British content. They're part of Europe-wide supply chains. They qualify for those exports tariff-free at the moment. They won't if we separate and have ourselves counted separately. So all in all, we seem to be heading for a Brexit that bears no resemblance to the promises made by the Leave campaign. We're heading for a costly Brexit, a damaging Brexit, a Tory Brexit, a Brexit that doesn't protect jobs, a Brexit that doesn't protect our rights. That's a very different kettle of fish from what most people voted for.
Nigel Evans, the correspondence sent to the Prime Minister says that a customs partnership would lead to a collapse of government. I mean, are you really saying that you are prepared to bring down Theresa May's government?
I don't think that is going to happen at any stage. I believe that Theresa May...
But if she calls your bluff, it could do.
I don't think Theresa May will call anybody's bluff. What she will do, I am absolutely certain, is listen very carefully to what the British people said. Actually, the voters in Richard's heartlands of the Midlands, the North East and the North West of England, who voted by huge numbers to leave the European Union. I believe that there is a solution whereby that we could do a trade deal with the European Union. It's in their favour. I mean, Germany, Germany exports 850,000 cars a year to the United Kingdom. I hear what Richard said about that, but they'll want to carry on selling us those cars. We will want to carry on buying them. Do they really want to impose a tit-for-tat tariff, which will actually damage those car exports to the UK?
Go on, Richard.
Go on, Richard.
The proportion of the economy of the rest of Europe that depends on their exports to Britain is around 3% of their GDP. For us, it's about 14%. That's a lot higher. For them, it's quite important. For us, it's vital. If we get that wrong, if we put barriers in the way of trade with our main export market and damage our links with the rest of the world at the same time, we are heading for a job-destroying, costly Brexit.
Do you know, Richard,
There's no need to do that. There's no need to go down the most damaging, extreme route possible.
Gentlemen,
There's no mandate for that.
We have to accept what the British people voted for, and we heard all these.
And they didn't vote on the customs union. They voted on the.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. Gentlemen, I am afraid we're under time. Nigel Evans in Westminster, Richard Corbett in Brussels. Many thanks to you both for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senior Brexit-supporting Conservative MPs have delivered what's been described as an ultimatum to Number 10, demanding that Theresa May drops one of the government's preferred options for customs arrangements after Brexit. A 30-page document seen by the BBC argues that the so-called customs partnership is riddled with problems. The document states that the proposals would be extremely complicated and difficult to operate, and its costs are as yet unquantifiable. What's more, the document argues that without full control over tariffs and regulations, the UK would be prevented from entering trade agreements requiring their adjustment. So, says the document, meaningful trade agreements would thus become impossible. Now, this leak comes ahead of a meeting of the Cabinet's key Brexit committee later today to discuss two proposals. We understand, however, that even if the committee does make any decision, and we're not sure about that, we probably won't hear about it. It'll be decided at a full meeting of the Cabinet, and I think that's going to be next week. Dominic Raab, these negotiations are meant to end by October, so the deal can be ratified or not across Europe and in this country. And here we are in May, and we still don't know what the government's policy is on customs union. It's incredible.
No, I think it's a fair question, but actually we've made real progress. We've got the first phase deal, we've got the implementation period, and really, actually, I think a lot of people listening to this at home would feel that a lot of the distance between the customs partnership and what's called the max fac approach to a customs border arrangement is a very technical one, and it is. And there are pros and cons of both approach, but actually we will thrash this out, we will get to an agreement, and I suspect actually this will be the key moment where we get the kind of consensus we need, not just in the government, but actually in the country at large. And I suspect, although I appreciate the media will blow up every step along the way as a squall and fighting politicians.
But why are you still deciding this in May of this year? It's almost 2 years since the referendum. It's over a year since you triggered Article 50. And a key part of our relationship with the EU, which is trade and customs, and you still can't tell us what your policy is.
I don't accept that. If you look at the government's policy from Lancaster House through to the Florence speech, it's that we were leaving the customs union. Why? Because we want to have control over our laws, but also be free to have an independent trade policy. And the two issues at stake here, or the two models at stake here, are the technical ways of best achieving it. So we avoid a hard border with Northern Ireland so that we continue trade and allow that to flourish, but also that we're faithful to the referendum in the way I've described. And actually, I think for a lot of people, yes, we're down to brass tacks, but it's a milestone along the way. We'll get through this, we'll get the right approach, and then we're going to go and get the best deal.
But what makes you think you could do free trade agreements with a customs partnership?
Well, I think that's the... So that both sides, both models have got pros and cons. I think the big question for those who are exponents of the partnership agreement is how actually we would have control over our laws and would we be free to trade independently. On the max fac side, the question is, well, how would you avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland? But we have, it's in fairness to say, heard from the head of HMRC that can be done in a way that avoids any infrastructure at the border under any circumstances. So we're really down at the technical details.
Well, which side are you on?
Well, I have to say, I like the idea of the innovative blue sky thinking that goes with the custom partnership, but I also, and I
thought that was the Max Fact that had the blue skies thinking,
no,
the technology.
No. On the Max Fact side, certainly if you look at precedent in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, US, and you look at things like trusted trader status, the advantage of technology in relation to pre-notification or avoiding any notification at the border. Actually,
so what side are you on?
Well, I'm not ideological about this. I think it's a technical issue. I'm minded towards Max Fact, but I would listen to all the arguments. And
is it important to you that after Brexit, this country can do full-blown free trade agreements?
Oh, it's not only important to me, but the Prime Minister's made it clear it's very important to her.
Then you are aware that Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary of the United States, and the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, of Australia, have said that unless Britain is clearly out of the customs union, not within a partnership relationship, there can be no free trade agreements with Australia or America.
Well, I think that's one of the questions that Cabinet will have to wrestle with. But
look, you are aware that's what they've said. It's not a question, it's a policy statement from Washington and Canberra.
And as I said, Andrew, there's a trade-off and pros and cons with both approaches. But we're really at the technical detail. What the Prime Minister has said, which is crucial, is that we need to be free to have an independent trade policy.
Then you cannot have a partnership.
Well, let's wait and see. I'm not going to do it.
But the partnership involves us taking tariffs from countries that even have a free trade agreement with us. We still have to collect tariffs, and then if we can find the money, give them the money back. Who's going to agree to that?
Well, and of course it's been dismissed as wishful thinking in Brussels, which I think is one of the bigger questions that the Cabinet will have to grapple with. But the reality is, we know what we want: freedom and independence in terms of trade policy. We know what we don't want: hard border with Northern Ireland and the Republic. And it's getting that win-win between the two. And I'm confident. And, you know, people have said we'd never get the implementation period. People said we'd never get the first phase.
These negotiations are a shambles now, aren't they?
Well,
I mean, I tell you what, a source in Brussels told me this morning, let's just keep turning the screw, because they keep folding and they haven't a clue what their positions are. That's the hard truth of it, isn't it?
Andrew, my experience 6 years in the Foreign Office is when any one side to a negotiation goes offline to the media making anonymous briefings, it's not a sign of strength, it's a sign of insecurity. I'm not going to do that. We don't do that on this side. We're professional about it. You're right, there's still some hard
You've got no positions to spin. You don't know what your position is.
Andrew, you know that's not true if you read Lancaster House and the Florence speech. But you're right, there's still some brass tacks to be nailed.
Brass tacks? It's fundamentals. No. And you know that. You're smiling. You know these are fundamental issues.
At every stage, someone has said, oh, this is going to be a deal breaker, we'll never get there. And at every moment, we found a way through. And that's the kind of stubborn optimism I think we need right now.
Mr. Thomas Simmons, your position, your party's position is that you would accept that Britain could not do its own free trade agreements because we'd stay in the customs union.
No, that isn't quite our position, Andrew. It's to stay in a customs union. And the flexibility that comes with that would depend upon how precisely it was negotiated. I mean, take, for example, Turkey, which has a customs union with the European Union. I'm not for a moment saying it should be replicated, Andrew, but just use it as an example to say to you that they have a degree of flexibility. I think they've got 20 other free trade agreements. But fundamentally,
very limited, and they have to accept whatever free trade deal. So you take the Canada deal, they have to accept the Canada deal that the EU made, but they don't get the same access to the Canadian market.
I accept.
That would be your position?
No, that wouldn't be our position. I just made that clear in my first answer, Andrew. I accept that. I was just using it as an example.
What way is Turkey a guide to what you want?
It was just an example to demonstrate that individuals, countries can negotiate their individual position. The reason we are in favour of a customs union is because we want to promote jobs and living standards, and also because the issue of the Irish border, it is not a mere technical issue. We're 20 years on from the Good Friday Agreement. We want to be in a position where we respect that agreement, maintain peace in Northern Ireland, and that means no return to a hard border.
And you may all be right in all that. I'm not arguing about that. That's your position. But surely you have to admit it follows from all that that you cannot do your own free trade agreements.
But surely you would accept, Andrew, as well, that it depends on how exactly you negotiate.
Well, hold on. Mr. Barnier has said he doesn't want the technical blue skies thinking approach. He says it's just pie in the sky that the Brexiteers on the Tory side have suggested. He's already thrown back privately. He's not interested in a customs partnership. Why on earth would he accept your membership of the customs union that involved our ability to do free trade agreements? It just wouldn't happen.
A degree of flexibility, Andrew, is what I've said. And obviously, Mr Barnier makes a number of public statements. Of course he does. And I wouldn't expect anyone in a negotiation to do anything else. All I'm pointing out, if I may say so in a very narrow sense, is there's a degree of flexibility. And it's an important distinction between a customs union and the customs union.
But it seems to me that your policy, though you're not in government, I said, but your policy is just as vague as the government's policy. Why would Europe agree to us remaining full members of the customs union but allow us to do our own free trade agreements? Why would it agree to that?
A customs union, Andrew, is the distinction. And what I'm just pointing out is that that is an approach. It's very distinct from the government. It accepts that this is a fundamental question, not a technical difference. And it is a solution to a number of the issues we have before us.
It's not a solution if Brussels doesn't agree to it. And Brussels is quite clear. If you're in the customs union or a version of the customs union, like Turkey, we do your free trade deals. You don't do them on a sovereign basis.
But there would have to be, Andrew, to use that example, a say that we had in external trade deals. Take, for example, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment
Turkey
Partnership,
doesn't have a say.
TTIP. Or they align their policy.
They don't have a say. They're not at the table.
No, but as I've just said, Andrew, it would be our individual agreement. And of course we would want to say in things like TTIP, which in my view would have threatened our National Health Service if it had come into being.
OK.
Sky News this afternoon. She's caught between a rock and a hard place here, isn't she?
I suppose she is a bit. And just to explain for your viewers, the customs union, the European Union's customs union, is an arrangement whereby all of the members of the European Union come together and they negotiate trade deals with other countries as a collective and apply an external tariff to the goods of non-EU countries coming into the European Union. Now, the European Union has offered Britain, offered the UK, the opportunity to continue to participate in the customs union and being part of it if Brexit happens. Now, my own view is that we should take them up on that offer because we derive huge economic benefits from being part of that arrangement. And look, if we can continue to have the economic benefits whilst not being in the European Union, then we should pursue that. She can't go down that avenue, she thinks, at the moment, because the kind of extreme right wing of her party are intent on having a very extreme break in our relationship with the European Union. And the thing about this customs partnership, it isn't the same as being part of the customs union, but what it is an arrangement whereby we would agree to collect duties for the European Union, but we'd still be able to negotiate our own trade deals. And to some extent, Kay, this is kind of hypothetical because the European Union institutions and other member states will not accept this customs partnership suggestion in any event.
Except that's not what we voted for, is it, Chukwuemeka? And any strong partnership is a betrayal of the people's will, is what people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and others would say.
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg is on the extreme right of the Tory party. He has a particular view. I think he's wrong. People voted for us to start the process of leaving the European Union. Parliament invoked Article 50 and did that, but no one actually said how we should leave the European Union. And in many respects, they were promised that we could retain all the economic benefits and indeed continue to be part of the economic structures of the European Union if we wanted, whilst being outside of the European Union. It's not the same, but Turkey has a customs union arrangement with the European Union, but they're not part of the European Union. So there's no reason why we cannot continue to participate in the customs union whilst being outside of the European Union. Now, some would say, look, we shouldn't do that. We should independently agree our own trade deals. And I think the issue here is it's not a question of whether we can negotiate trade deals, whether we're in or out of the customs union, we'll be able to do that. The question is how much bargaining power you have. And if you're negotiating with China as part of a bloc of 500 million citizens in the European Union, and they've got 1.3 billion people, you've obviously got a much stronger bargaining position than if we do so on our own. a smaller economy of 65 million people. That's what we're really talking about here. And what I'd say to Theresa May is face down people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and the European Research Group. I call them the Economic Ruin Group because I think that's what many of their ideas would lead to. Because the long and the short of it, Kay, is they don't have a majority in the House of Commons for what they're proposing. At the moment, there is broadly a majority in the House of Commons to have the UK continuing to participate in the customs union if Brexit happens.
OK, so people sitting at home this afternoon watching and trying to keep their head around what's going on as far as this Brexit war cabinet is called, or whatever you want to call it, and they're meeting this afternoon at Downing Street. What people at home will want to know is, which one? I voted to leave the European Union, is what they're going to say, for example.
Yes.
How much more is it going to cost me if we do Plan A or Plan B? And why are politicians even arguing about this? Because actually I voted to leave, which meant lock, stock and 2 smoking barrels.
Well, in the context of what I'm about to say next, that's probably a bit of an unfortunate turn of phrase, but you didn't know what I was going to say next, which was that the thing is about this is it's impacting in ways that I think many of us, I didn't foresee, and there are lots of new facts arising. So one big new thing that arises in this context is the Good Friday Agreement settlement in Northern Ireland, and everybody on both sides is keen to avoid us having a hard border, a physical infrastructure, if you like, separating Northern Ireland from the Republic of Ireland. When there was a physical infrastructure and a border in that sense, there was lots of smuggling that went on between the border, criminality, and that fueled the troubles between the paramilitaries, the nationalist and loyalist paramilitaries. So everybody wants to avoid that. And the problem we've got, Kay, is that if we're not in the customs union, there will, and frankly, the single market as well, then you will need some kind of physical infrastructure over there. And that's why this Good Friday Agreement settlement is becoming such a big issue in the context of the Brexit negotiations. And the other thing I would just say to your viewers who, you know, many, and it was a 50-50 thing, I suppose, would have voted to leave the European Union, is that we're now finding out whether we can have our cake and eat it, whether you can have all the economic benefits that we enjoy as members of the European Union now if we leave. And what's very clear is that you can't have all those benefits if you leave. Otherwise, why would anybody join the club? And this is the big difference with the debate.
People knew that, didn't they, Chukwuemeka? They knew that, and they voted for it anyway. And, you know, if you're living in a council flat in Wallsend, you're saying, I don't care about the border in Northern Ireland, what that means. I voted this way, and as a result, this is what I expect to happen. This is what I expect my MP to push through as part of the final vote in the House of Commons. And if they don't, he or she is going to get a bloody nose.
Well, I just don't think that's the way that people will see it necessarily. I do think if you're in a council flat in Wallsend or wherever the place, sorry, I didn't quite get where you referred to, but I think you will care if this is going to impact on the situation on the island of Ireland, where, look, we've all lived through it. We saw decades of bloodshed where people lost their lives. And if there's a real prospect that if we don't get this Brexit right, it could impact on that, I think wherever you live in this country,
you think bloodshed
you're going to care about that.
Is a real option unless we sort this out?
I wouldn't say it's an option, but all I do know is that people who live there, different stakeholders in Northern Ireland, I co-chair the all-party parliamentary group on EU relations, and we're due to be going over to Belfast, hopefully in the next few weeks. But people there, but also the Irish government, have told us that they fear there is a real risk that you could see that happening. And I suppose, look, Kay, what we're talking about here is think of this as a bit like a house purchase. In 2016, people opted to buy a house. Now, if you buy a house, you do a survey on it. You check the structural foundations are right after you've put in the offer. But you're not going to go and exchange and actually complete the purchase if your survey comes back and says, actually, you're not going to get what you thought you were getting, and actually the foundations of this thing are unsound. And that's what we're going through right now. And that's why I think we have every right to keep an open mind about this process. And it's why I think this is far too big an issue to be left to 650 MPs to decide on behalf of 65 million people. I really do think that people need to have a voice on what they think about the Brexit deal when hopefully it will come at the end of the year, because this is going to affect future generations, and in particular your young viewers and your viewers, you know, young family members. They're the ones who are going to have to live with this in a way that none of the rest of us may have to, because we won't be around as long on them. So you know, for goodness sake, let's get this right.
I like that housing analogy. I'm going to steal it when I'm doing the counter-argument with someone else. It's good to talk to you, Chuck Ramiro, as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks a lot. Former Cabinet Minister Lord Patten says it would be a stain on our history if the House of Lords didn't act to maintain the status quo on the Irish border post-Brexit. The government is facing another defeat in the Lords this afternoon, while Theresa May has been hosting a Brexit cabinet meeting where the customs union was top of the agenda. With the latest on the debate in the House of Lords and the result of the Prime Minister's Brexit war cabinet meeting this afternoon, lots to talk about with our political editor Faisal Islam joining us live from Downing Street. Hello to you, Faisal. Do we know how it went yet?
Well, it hasn't actually finished, Kay, surprisingly enough. It's been going for a couple of hours. Guess what? Who went in there about 10 minutes ago was the Secretary-General of the UN. I don't think that's to mediate between the various warring factions of the Cabinet. The one thing that we're told is that Theresa May has said we're leaving the customs union, won't be rejoining our customs union, has come up with a couple of compromises, one called a partnership, another called an arrangement. Not entirely sure exactly what that entails, but certainly it would appear that they would either option would take years in terms of technology that does not yet exist, and the aim is to try and keep trade flowing with Europe as freely as possible, while at the same time carving out the freedom to do for the United Kingdom post-Brexit to do its own trade deals. Now, there's a fundamental difficulty there in that the European Union has said either of these options aren't really going to wash, but the Cabinet's been inside deciding. There was a notion that they might make a big decision on this today. Which of the options would they go for? Prime Minister, Chancellor, Business Secretary Greg Clark appeared to be in favour of this customs partnership, which would essentially keep the borders exactly the same. That's good for Northern Ireland, but would require all sorts of strange and convoluted methods of tracking where every cigarette packet and rice grain goes, and working out if you have to pay rebates on tariffs depending on... Anyway, it's all very complicated. The other one is called maximum facilitation, which sounds no less easy, but involves essentially accepting that there's going to be some sort of border infrastructure, but trying to minimise it. That's Boris Johnson's favourite option. Most of the Brexiters want it, and indeed, as you know and have been saying, the Tory rebels
that he was gone. One or two problems there with the line with Faisal in Downing Street. Basically, that meeting continuing on at the moment. Another challenging week for the Prime Minister. Faisal will have more just as soon as that Brexit war cabinet finally breaks up for the day.
Now, senior cabinet ministers held a key Brexit meeting this afternoon aimed at thrashing out what Britain wants to replace membership of the EU customs union. Staying inside the customs union has already been rejected by the cabinet, as it would prevent Britain striking its own trade deals with other countries. Now, one option is a new customs partnership. Britain would have no trade tariffs with the EU as now, but it would collect tariffs on behalf of the EU on goods that come into the UK from other countries. Another possibility is a customs arrangement where border checks are kept to a minimum, perhaps by using technology or allowing trusted firms free access across EU borders. But that is expected to require at least some border checks, which would, of course, be unacceptable to the Irish Republic. Well, our political editor Robert Peston is in Downing Street where that meeting was held. So, Robert, what then did they actually decide?
They decided absolutely nothing. It was total deadlock. There are 11 members of this subcommittee, but the chief whip, who's on the side of the Prime Minister, was co-opted in, so it was roughly 6 all in terms of opinion on the two plans. So what they've decided is more work has to be done to see which of the two proposals is actually likely to be the most practical. This is a bit of a disaster, though, for David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, who can't get on with crucial trade talks with the rest of the EU until he knows what Theresa May and her cabinet actually want him to propose to Brussels. There's going to have to be another meeting, maybe next week, maybe the week after.
All right, so no surprise then, no decision today. But time is running out, isn't it, to reach that agreement?
It is running out, and the stakes are incredibly high, because what EU governments have said is unless the Prime Minister can show progress in terms of a plan to keep that border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland open, they will suspend all serious negotiations on Brexit at the next summit in June. Now, this customs plan is absolutely central, as you pointed out, to this issue of keeping the border open. So we are heading, yet again, you might say, to a looming Brexit crisis in just a few weeks' time, unless the Cabinet can rally behind a plan. But goodness knows what it is at the moment.
Robert Peston, to be continued, no doubt. Thank you very much indeed.
Now, Theresa May has spent all this afternoon locked in discussions with her Brexit Cabinet Committee. Her team of senior Cabinet ministers were trying to agree on what kind of post-Brexit customs arrangement Britain should have with the EU. Theresa May has proposed two alternatives, but ministers are split over which solution to go with. And so far, the European Union has been distinctly frosty about both of them. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Cabinet ministers had a 3-hour meeting looking at whether Britain should collect the EU's tariffs as goods come into the UK and then refund suppliers if the goods don't end up in the EU. It's an approach Mrs May thinks could smooth border traffic, especially in Northern Ireland. Some ministers are deeply hostile. They want the idea dropped, and their backbench supporters have gone into battle, threatening to withhold their votes on other government business if the idea isn't dropped.
There are many people in the Cabinet who are not keen on this customs partnership, so I'd be very surprised if it gets to that. I think this is one of this type of good idea that comes up, and then as the details work through, people realise it just isn't a runner.
The Chief Whip has told the Prime Minister that she might need a compromise like the so-called customs partnership approach or the high-tech cameras and tracking approach to buy off pro-Remain Tory MPs, who right now, he reckons, are ready to vote to stay in the customs union.
Is Karen back?
In the Commons, one Labour MP mocked the Prime Minister's two customs options.
The first is untried and untested. The second relies on unproven technology. In any event, neither will be ready in time that they are needed, and both have been written off in Europe. Why, with just 6 months to go before a draft Brexit deal is signed off, are the government still considering options that we all know are not feasible?
We're committed to delivering on our commitment of no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and ensuring we have as frictionless trade as possible with the European Union. There are a number of ways in which that can be delivered, and
Two of Theresa May's old coalition cabinet colleagues chatted on a podcast about Tory MPs' choices ahead.
I would be very, very tempted to vote to stay in the customs union, because I think, although it doesn't solve all the problems at all, and
that wasn't the question.
No, but
what would you do with a yay or nay on the deal?
Well, I don't think you can stop Brexit, and I don't think you can have a second referendum. But I would have a Brexit. So all of it, and much as I regret all that, the country made a decision, but I think you could create a much better outcome.
At the end of this afternoon's 3-hour meeting, Theresa May said she and her senior officials would now go away and think about the criticisms made by 6 of her senior ministers.
And Gary joins us now from the House of Commons. So, well, what happened, Gary?
Well, the official line from number 10 is that the two options that went into that meeting for dealing with the customs arrangement with Europe, the high-tech one and the partnership one that Mrs May was pushing, both of those remain viable. And the line from number 10 is that there was unanimous agreement in the room that both of them, whilst needing some serious and urgent work, remain on the table. But I've been speaking to some people who were in the room, and you get a slightly different flavour. 6 out of the 11 cabinet ministers, that's including the Prime Minister, who were in the room, 6 of them, including Sajid Javid, the newly appointed Home Secretary, criticised the plan that the Prime Minister wanted them to support, the partnership plan. She had already explained that she saw support for this. She was making it a very personal bid for support in the room. She saw it as a key way to unlock the problems with Northern Ireland ahead of the June European Council. that was expressing not just a personal commitment, but an urgency and a focus to what she was talking about. Nonetheless, the 6 cabinet ministers who objected to all of this, making a lot of the arguments that were made in the document that was handed over to number 10 yesterday, was saying that it was it would ensnare Britain even after Brexit and all the institutions of Europe. It would put off people who might want to do trade deals with us, and it might not even work. One after another they piled in. The other side had counter-arguments, but at the end, even though number 10 is saying this option that the Prime Minister would like to take to the June European Council is still in play, you have to say it looks a bit battered after that 3-hour session.
Gary Gibbon at the House of Commons. Christian.
Well, in a moment, I'll be talking to the Conservative MP Vicky Ford, who voted Remain. But first, from Westminster, I'm joined by the Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen, who is a member of the pro-Brexit European Reform Group. And it appears...
European Research Group.
Research Group, sorry, I beg your pardon. It appears that your group's hope to kill off Theresa May's preferred option of this customs arrangement has not quite worked. Is that your understanding?
I'm a bit more optimistic than that we've pointed out the many failings of the proposals for a customs partnership, and I think what you've seen is a majority of the Brexit subcommittee have decided that they agree with us.
So you think it is dead?
I think it is dead, yes.
Right, but I mean, that's not the reporting, is it, at the moment? I mean, it appears Theresa May is saying both options are still alive and she wants more research into them. I mean, when the country voted Brexit, did you ever think that 2 years down the road, the government still wouldn't know what its policy on the customs union was?
Well, the government have been clear. We're leaving the single market, we're leaving the customs union, and we're leaving the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. That's what was explained by both sides of the argument before the referendum, and that's what we must deliver. And there are many risks and pitfalls of the proposed customs partnership, not the least of all being that the European Union actually don't believe it would work either, but it would be hugely bureaucratic. I mean, can you imagine a situation where we're collecting tariffs on behalf of the EU, guaranteeing that goods aren't going to be re-exported if we're not collecting the tariffs, and the EU are doing the same for us? We'd be paying into EU coffers, and we wouldn't really be able to have an independent trade policy, which is actually the big win economically for leaving the European Union.
What is the public supposed to draw from the fact that Theresa May can't even convince her own cabinet on her idea?
Well, the idea of having a cabinet and a Brexit sub-cabinet committee is for that discussion, that it isn't the Prime Minister's decision alone. You know, it is the combined wisdom of the cabinet and a collective decision across government that will decide the government's policy. It's not a dictatorship, Christian.
Do you think there is a majority in the House of Commons, for your view, for this hard Brexit view?
Well, it's not hard Brexit, as we've explained many times, Christian. There is no hard Brexit or soft Brexit. There's either
your view. Do you think you've got
there is either Brexit or staying in, or staying attached to the European Union.
Oh, there are lots of different Brexits, Mr. Bridgen. You can talk to all sorts of MPs about that. I'm asking you: do you think your view, the Eurosceptic group of MPs, could win a vote in the House of Commons?
Yes, I do. I think that most MPs will concede that it was leave the customs union, leave the single market, leave the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. That was the will of the British people. And I think if we don't deliver that, Christian, I think we're going to really undermine belief in politics in general. And I think even people who voted Remain, perhaps not yourself, but most people who voted Remain have now come to terms with the fact that the democratic decision was that we're leaving the European Union, and those are the terms that we're leaving on. And to make the best of Brexit, we need to be able to have our own free trade deals around the world, and that's what we're going to do.
Thank you very much. Never assume how your interviewers vote, but it's a nice try. Let's go to Vicky Ford, who is in the House of Commons as well. Well, Andrew Bridgen says there is a majority in the House of Commons for his view.
Well, I think it's really important that we keep all options open. The Prime Minister's been very clear that we need to find a solution which means no hard border in Ireland, no border in the Irish Sea, the minimum amount of disruption of our trade with Europe, but also the ability to have a new trade policy with other parts of the world, which means we do need a new relationship. We can't stay in the customs union as we are. We can't stay in the single market. This partnership idea has got, obviously it's complex and needs working on, but it has not been rejected by the EU. They've asked questions, and I think
has
the
it been
cabinet
rejected
ministers,
by the cabinet committee?
And I think the cabinet ministers are also right to ask questions about how it might work in practice, and one needs to go away with that. But we should continue working on it.
But you heard your colleague.
Actually, so yes, but I also would contend that the solution that he is suggesting, which would involve customs declarations for every good crossing the border with Ireland, every good crossing the English Channel, would also be hugely bureaucratic and even more so. So if we can make a customs partnership which would need proper policing and proper enforcement and new systems, then it actually might be simpler. So let's keep discussing it and see if we can make it work, and be optimistic to see if it can make it work.
Yeah, but what are people supposed to make of this? I mean, Andrew Bridgen's just told us it's dead. Theresa May has lost in the Cabinet Committee. The idea is over. And you're saying, no, it's still on the table.
So
it's still there.
I've just been with the Prime Minister going through the voting lobby tonight, and she's absolutely clear that she's going to look at those questions, but all options are still open, because we need to find solutions. I was actually in Brussels on Monday talking to senior members of the European Parliament who are interested in follow customs issues, and they would like to know more about this suggestion. It cannot be a deal that keeps us tied to the customs union. I understand that, but I think that that threat is not a real threat. We should let the Prime Minister negotiate, let our civil servants negotiate, and not reject a deal before we know what it might look like.
Right, but if Theresa May can't even convince her own cabinet of her preferred option, what does it tell us about her leadership?
Actually, no, that's not what I understand happened. I understand
well, she didn't
that
convince
there were
them today,
questions.
did she?
I understand that quite rightly the cabinet members who are less involved with customs issues asked questions that need to be answered.
And they couldn't take a decision.
It's right that we should go away and look at those. But let us also say that the alternative solutions are unworkable as well, because they either put a hard border in Ireland or a hard border in the Irish Sea, neither of which is workable either. So let's keep working on finding new solutions.
If she caves in to them, are you prepared to rebel?
No, what I understand is that she's taken the questions and they're going to go away and look at them. And everybody's got to be comfortable with this. We need to find new solutions because we're trying to have a new trading relationship with our largest trading partner, as well as new relationships with other parts of the world. That means we need to find new solutions. There's a lot of work to be done.
Vicky Ford, thank you very much.
Now, the Prime Minister has asked for revised proposals after meeting with senior ministers to discuss Britain's trading relationship with the European Union after Brexit. Theresa May discussed her preferred customs partnership plan with Cabinet colleagues this afternoon, but Downing Street says that more work needs to be done on the various options. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, has more details.
It never rains, but it pours, especially in this famous street.
Sir, would a customs partnership make trade deals impossible?
The Prime Minister was stuck between senior ministers. They talked for hours about how customs should work after Brexit. But the truth is, they simply couldn't agree. What they're clashing about matters. How should we sort out customs after we leave the EU? Well, one of the Prime Minister's ideas is the so-called customs partnership, where Britain would collect tariffs on behalf of the whole continent when goods arrive here from the rest of the world. But many of her colleagues think that's fanciful and unworkable too, and are trying to get rid of that plan. Brexiteer backbenchers put their objections in black and white. A hefty document passed to the BBC and sent to Number 10. Described to me as a threat, they'd collapse the government if the idea remains.
It would be extraordinary if the Prime Minister were to undermine her own policy by following this scheme, which sounded superficially attractive initially, but now the details have been looked at and the consequences examined, appears to be a bad scheme.
But other elements in the Tory party protest. They want to preserve closer ties with the EU and keep the partnership principle.
We shouldn't be closing down options. And if I have a criticism of some of my Conservative colleagues, is that they seem to be resolute and obsessed and closing down options.
But the two sides at home pushing the PM are joined by the realities of the two sides on the Irish border. The Irish government and the EU keep warning that unless there are better solutions to the customs conundrum, the whole Brexit deal could stall.
We want to see real and meaningful progress by June if we're going to meet that December deadline. And there's a real risk that we won't meet the October deadline rather, if we don't see real and meaningful progress in June.
This afternoon's crunch meeting was, in the end, more like chewing the ideas over.
Questions to the Prime Minister.
But listen very carefully to the Prime Minister early on. Did she sound stuck on just one idea?
We're committed to delivering on our commitment of no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland and ensuring we have as frictionless trade as possible with the European Union. There are a number of ways in which that can be delivered.
She said there are many ways, and there may have to be, because the Cabinet could not agree this afternoon. I'm told a succession of ministers, a narrow majority, spoke against the Prime Minister's partnership idea. That's denied by number 10, but Theresa May asked for revised proposals for more work to be done on the existing plans. An admission that nearly 2 years after the EU referendum, the government doesn't have a customs plan with full backing of the Cabinet, let alone the rest of the EU.
This is complicated, but it's taking time, a long time, and no decisions yet. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Crunch time on Brexit has ended in a soggy mess. A decision on Britain's customs relationship has been put off after senior ministers failed to reach any agreement. Theresa May has asked officials to refine the proposals after her Brexit war cabinet was unable to unite behind one of the two options on the table. It's worth noting that both options have already been dismissed as unworkable by EU officials. Our political editor, Nick Watt, is here. And Nick, what happened? It was all a question, really, of the maths, wasn't it, at the end?
Yes, well, it was a difficult day for the Prime Minister. She was unable to get the support of her Brexit Cabinet subcommittee for her preferred option, which is the customs partnership. Now, the big change was the arrival on that committee of Sajid Javid, the new Home Secretary. His predecessor was supportive of the Prime Minister, and the new Home Secretary, even though he was a Remain supporter in 2016, absolutely spoke at length against that plan, and he was also supported by Gavin Williamson, the Defence Secretary, who was also a Remain supporter back in 2016. Now, there wasn't a vote, but had there been a vote, it would effectively have been 6-5 against the Prime Minister. That stark figure is disputed by number 10, but it seems pretty clear that's what it was. Now, the Brexiteers are absolutely delirious. I spoke to somebody familiar with today's discussion, today's meeting, and they said that proposal of the Prime Minister is a dead parrot. But Remainers are not happy. I've been hearing from Remain ministers, we've been hearing threats of resignations on the Leave side. Perhaps we need to have a big think about this. And what they're saying is, if the Prime Minister now comes up with something that is unacceptable to the Remainers and is acceptable to this Cabinet subcommittee, they would say, well, maybe we need to have Parliament have a say, because they think Parliament will be up for the softer option, and the only way those Remain ministers can allow that to happen is for them to resign and for them to follow their conscience on any votes on this. So look, today I've been taking a look at the cards that Theresa May is playing with. Bluff, counter-bluff, and ultimately a showdown. The finest poker player would no doubt be proud of the game playing out within the Conservative Party over Brexit. In a significant intervention, the main Brexit group issued a stark warning to Theresa May to tread with care. And an apparently nervous Prime Minister retreated once again as she delayed a decision on the nature of the UK's future customs relationship with the EU after a cabinet backlash against her preferred option. Since limping back into Downing Street after her general election setback last year, Theresa May has appeared to have few cards to play. Assailed by hardline Brexiteers and with Brussels ready to pounce on any Tory division, the Prime Minister has seemed to be at the mercy of events.
Are you happy with the customs partnership?
And today, the Prime Minister ordered her officials back to the drawing board after two of her new cabinet recruits, the one-time Remain supporters Sajid Javid and Gavin Williamson, expressed strong reservations about the so-called customs partnership.
We do regard the customs partnership, as we understand that it is proposed, to be deficient, because the idea that companies would have to pay the tariff and then claim it back again would obviously be hugely administratively complex. It would make it very difficult to sign trade deals with other countries. The Prime Minister has been very clear to date, and everything she has said in all her speeches I have absolutely supported. And if she remains if the Prime Minister sticks to the position that she's articulated, I think the vast majority of my colleagues will be very, very happy.
Remain supporters believe the Prime Minister does still have cards to play on Brexit, because there may be more votes in Parliament for an approach closer to the number 10 plans. And some Brexiteers should have a think about their tactics.
They need to stop making veiled threats, because what we're up against now is Brexit reality. We were all promised this would be terribly easy, the world would be queuing up, it would all be very straightforward. And the answer is it's immensely complex. And the reality is that Parliament wants to protect trade and jobs. Parliament really cares about issues around the Northern Ireland border. All the select committees have been forensically examining all the potential complications. Unless we sort out issues about frictionless trade across the borders. And so I think the reality is that there just aren't the parliamentary numbers for a hard walk-away, no-deal Brexit.
In the style of a nervous poker player, Theresa May has chosen to check once again by deferring a customs decision. But soon she will have to put all her chips in or take on board the cards of rival players.
Nick, what then?